Hello, and good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, and to all of you from different places of the globe. It's very good to see some friends and some mentors in the Zoom line. Today we are discussing the fourth year of annexation and legalization of the India of Article 370 and 35 in occupied Kashmir, what impacts it has on the social, political, and also the religious and human rights lives of the people of Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir during these 4 years. As we all know, the way this article was revoked and the type of action the government of India took, it took everybody by surprise, whether it was the legal fraternity of India or the people at large around the globe, the practitioners, they thought it was illegal. But it was a political decision rather than a legal decision. It has impacted the lives of the people of Kashmir through many ways. So today we will discuss it, and I will first of all call on Robert Vitana, who's a writer who has written extensively on the settler colonialism, because I think this Indian occupied Kashmir is the settler colonialism in its new manifest. And so, Robert, you have the floor to discuss it. You have been writing on Palestine and other issues, and also on Kashmir. Robert, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good day. I'm pleased to be here today with this distinguished panel as we observe the most recent tragedy to befall the people of Kashmir, August 5th, 2019, when the Indian government abrogated Article 370 of its constitution. We know, of course, that this article granted Kashmir some limited self-government, but the repression that the Kashmiri people now experience is nothing new, although it has worsened since 2019. It is difficult to believe that conditions for the people there could be any worse than they have been for decades, but that is the case. This situation is one of the most brutal, if not the most brutal, examples of settler colonialism in the world today. When discussing human rights in any context, I often refer to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This milestone document was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 1948, and among the many countries that have since ratified it is India. However, ratification and implementation are far different. Kashmir has long been the most occupied place on Earth, with an official count of 1 soldier for every 30 civilians. However, that is the number from 2020, the most recent figure I was able to locate. But with large numbers of Indian soldiers flooding into the country in the last 4 years, that ratio is certainly no longer accurate. Even, however, assuming it was still accurate, that is a tremendous number of foreign occupation soldiers to be in any nation. As I mentioned, I have in the past and in other places and mediums documented Indian violations of all the articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The violation of these rights has obvious negative impacts on the socio-economic status of Kashmir and the political status of the nation and its citizens. I will mention a few of them today. Article 13 has 2 components as follows, quote, 1, everyone has the right to freedom of movement and residence within the borders of each state, and 2, everyone has the right to leave any country, including his own, and return to his country, quote, quote. Today in Kashmir, the passports of some Kashmiri journalists and activists have been suspended. The right may or not be invoked. This right may not be invoked in the case of prosecutions generally arising from non-political crimes or from acts contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations, close quote. The activities of journalists reporting Indian atrocities can in no way be seen as non-political crimes. They are not crimes in any sense of the word. The violation of Article 13 is related to the violation of 19, which reads as follows, quote, everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas to any media and regardless of frontiers, close quotes. The journalists and activists I mentioned a moment ago were expressing their opinions and have been severely penalized for doing so. Revocation of passports is hardly the worst fate awaiting journalists and others who dare to speak out against India. Saeed Shujat Bukhari, editor of Rising Kashmir, a daily Kashmiri newspaper, was assassinated in 2018. Writing in the Al Jazeera Journalism Review in May of this year, journalists Adil Amin Akun and Khalid Bashar Gura wrote the following, quote, "His death confirmed to many what they already feared, that being a journalist in Kashmir can be deadly. Indeed, just 1 year later, the situation would become critical when India repealed Article 370, which had previously granted self-governing status to the region. During mass protests, the government of India ramped up the internet blackouts it had already been routinely imposing on Kashmir and intensified its practice of detaining any journalist who dared voice dissent." Close quote. These two journalists interviewed several other journalists for the article, most of whom did not want their names used. They reported this, quote, "All of those who spoke to us on the basis of anonymity claim that the state is using misinformation, withholding of advertisements, surveillance, and online information control to silence critical voices and force journalists to resort to self-censorship in order to remain safe." Close quote. So in order to save their own lives, journalists must self-censor what they write. Journalists everywhere should be able to report and interpret facts without fear of any reprisals, but in Kashmir, this is definitely not the case. Another example of a violation of this right is the recent removal from the Master of Arts in English curriculum of the University of Kashmir and Cluster University of the poetry of Agashat Eid Ali and other work that the new Indian man, quote, "propagates secessionist ideology," close quote. Article 20 also of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights also has two components. The first reads as follows: "Everyone has the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and association," close quote. Freedom House's report from 2022 on Kashmir summarized the situation there. Quote, "The region's autonomous status was revoked in 2019, and what had been a state of Jammu and Kashmir was reconstituted as two union territories under the direct control of the Indian central government. The move stripped residents of many of their previous political rights. Civil liberties have also been curtailed to quell ongoing public opposition to the reorganization. Indian security forces are frequently accused of human rights violations, but few are punished." One of the civil liberties quelled is freedom of assembly, and Freedom House's report on that topic in Jammu and Kashmir from 2020 is telling. Quote, "Freedom of assembly is frequently restricted during times of unrest. The authorities often reject requests for permits for public gatherings submitted by the separatist APHC. Separatist leaders are frequently arrested prior to planned demonstrations, and violent clashes between protests and security forces are not uncommon." Close quote. The second component of Article 20 is this, quote, "No one may be compelled to belong to an association," close quote. With India's so-called Independence Day approaching on August 15, Kashmiris are being encouraged to take pictures of themselves and their families waving the Indian flag. While this may not specifically compel them to belong to an association, it does seem to force them to participate in an association they want no part of. This action, however, does violate Article 15, another Article 2 parts. One, quote, "Everyone has the right to a nationality or denied the right to change their nationality," close quote. By abrogating Article 370 of this Constitution, India violated both components of this article. By being encouraged to take pictures of themselves while displaying the flag of India, Kashmiris are, in a sense, being forced to endorse India's repression of them. Article 23 has 4 parts, but we want to look at the first one. Quote, "Everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and to protection against unemployment." At the present time, millions of Kashmiris are out of work, replaced by Indian nationals. All the major administrative and government jobs formerly held by Kashmiris are now held by Indians. A report from the Kashmir Times from April of this year stated that unemployment in Jammu and Kashmir is a shocking 23.1%, and this is probably underreported. I have not related all the ways in which the brutal Indian government violates all 30 articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Doing so would require days of discussion. But despite all this, the Indian government attempts to convince the world that everything in Jammu and Kashmir is fine. in fact, better than before the abrogation. Writing in The Wire, however, Arfa Khan Shirwani reports this in response to India's portrayal of life in Kashmir. Quote, "The people of Kashmir, though, paint a very different picture in which silence, fear, rising prices, and unemployment have taken over the region." This is the situation in Kashmir, in Jammu and Kashmir today. This is what the people there have to contend with: repression, fear, arbitrary arrest, sudden death. Most of the world seems to be ignoring this situation, which puts the onus on us to publicize these atrocities and advocate for these innocent victims. There's an old cliche that asks, if not me, who? If not now, when? The time is now, and the obligation is ours. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. This shows the concern that the people around the globe have about the human rights violations that are being perpetrated by the Indian government and their troops in Indian-occupied Kashmir, violation of the international laws and international treaties, as one of a Canadian friend is talking about it from Ottawa to us. I will go now to my friend, a very dear friend, Dr. Khurram Iqbal. Dr. Khurram Iqbal is an associate professor at the Department of Security Studies and Criminology, Malta University, Austria. He is a member of Council for Asian Traditional Threats Research, an international body of leading Asian experts on counterterrorism and transitional crimes. Dr. Khurram Iqbal will talk on religious extremism in India and the majoritarian politics of RSS and BJP. Dr. Khurram, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Altaf Hussain Wani, for extending me the invitation to discuss this important topic on this important date. And this signifies the 4 years of revocation of Article 370. So with 4 years into revocation of Article 370, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government is nearing completion, 4-year term in office. And I would say in the last 2 terms enjoyed by Prime Minister Modi and his Bharatiya Janata Party, Hinduization or Saffronization of India is complete beyond any doubt. Exactly 100 years ago, when Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh was founded, they envisioned a goal of converting a large landmass as big as India, as diverse as India, to convert that into a Hindu sphere of influence, to reverse centuries, what RSS calls centuries of subjugation at the hands of foreign invaders. So job for converting a big, or I would say the largest democracy of the world is due where it's due. And they have gone through various phases, and we have seen at the time when various fundamentalist organizations around the world, when they are suffering when they are struggling for their survival, RSS is perhaps the only fundamentalist organization which has not only been able to rule a country twice, but it has also been able to achieve its agenda of converting India into a Hindu Rashtra. How they have done that? Of course, there's a big organizational mechanism involved in that. And the second question that arises, whether this saffronization of India is it reversible? In my number of public engagements in Pakistan, I have argued that saffronization of India is not reversible, because what we have seen during the last 10 years, that this phenomena called Hinduization or saffronization, it's been institutionalized in India. You look at the Indian judiciary, you look at Indian higher education, you look at Indian security apparatus, you look at the composition of Narendra Modi's cabinet, I think the kind of influence that Hindutva elements have acquired in India, that is not likely to reverse anytime soon. That is why most of the observers of Indian politics are anticipating a third time victory for Narendra Modi in the coming elections. So with this agenda about to be completed, I think RSS and BJP, they are just short of declaring India as a Hindu Rashtra. And as tactically, I would say that BJP would avoid doing that, to officially declare India as a Hindu Rashtra because of the international pressure, perhaps. But all the preparations have been done. And the last stumbling block that I would say is the introduction of what BJP called Universal Civil Code, which is basically a way to saffronize the Indian law as well. Because if you look at India, India has maintained different special laws to in consideration of the diverse population that India has maintained. But I think Modi is likely to go into the next elections with this agenda of introducing uniform civil code that has a dominant Hindu tone. And with that, I think this saffronization of India would reach to its logical end. So besides this universal civil code, I think the second most important agenda or the camp for his election campaign would be the revocation of 370. Narendra Modi would like to portray this to his fundamentalist constituency as a big achievement. Narendra Modi would like to highlight this reduced intensity of insurgency in Kashmir. But if you look at the militant landscape in Kashmir, I would say that insurgency has not subsided. It has only changed forms. Because if you look at the terrorist attacks, militant attacks, or the insurgent attacks, whatever you call, because of the political sensitivity attached to these terms, they are pretty much there. But the changes that we are witnessing is that before 2019, there were clear indications of organized violence. There were indications that these incidents have been perpetrated by, some large organizations, which of course India would use to malign Pakistan, that these organizations are being handled by Pakistan. But if you look at the current wave of attacks starting from 2019, these attacks are low intensity attack, not indicating involvement of any organized movement, but these increasingly showcase a very indigenous form of involvement by the Kashmiri people. So the target selection has also changed. Before 2019, 21st century, the militants in Kashmir would prefer targeting the Indian military, law enforcement agencies. But gradually, as the militancy becomes weak for various reasons, now the militants in Kashmir, they are left with few options, but to target the civilian populations in India. So these are some changing dynamics of militancy in Kashmir, which suggests that militancy persists in Kashmir. It is taking a new shape. It indicates an indigenization of militancy in Kashmir. So with these problems persisting, what are the policy options for Pakistan? I think to respond to these saffronization of Indian policies, or India, Pakistan has tried to internationalize this problem, but I would say with limited success. During last 4 years, Pakistan has been able to keep the cause alive despite a not so conducive international environment. Because at the moment, international environment is very conducive for India because of its perceived utility to counter China. And in American and Western strategic calculus, I think they are willing to look the other way, while India basically saffronizes when BJP saffronizes such a big country, as long as it is willing to serve the Western strategic interests of countering China. So despite all these unconducive environment, Pakistan has tried its best, but I think much could have been done. And one reason that Pakistan would not achieve the desired results when it comes to projecting Kashmir cause at the international forums is the internal political turmoil in Pakistan that has direct bearing on Pakistan's economy as well as foreign policy as well. One reason Modi was able to seek tacit approval of countries such as UAE and Saudi Arabia was because of he was able to develop their business stakes in Kashmir as well as India as well. So I think this is the age of geoeconomics. Rhetorically, Pakistan has recognized that there is a pivot, there's a shift from geostrategy to geoeconomics. And I think it is important that Pakistan increases the stakes of international players in terms of creating their economic stakes in Pakistan. So I would say that involving the multinational companies from UAE, Saudi Arabia, other Gulf countries into Pakistan's industrial revitalization program is imperative to secure some of the core objectives of Pakistan's foreign policy. And I would, of course, before I conclude, I would just leave the panelist with one question: whether Kashmir still is defined as a core objective in Pakistan's foreign policy, because the national security policy that was issued by Pakistan in 2022 that degraded Kashmir from a core to a vital interest. So that's something which has not been debated and discussed in Pakistan. And this is the right time that if such degradation of Kashmir has happened, what was the rationale behind that and how it can impact the future of Kashmir. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kurum. It's always very wonderful to listen to you with your thought-provoking research on the subject and the inputs you give. You told us that much could have been done. So we will ask the men from the horse's mouth, what was that much could have been done? What is that? And we have with us Ambassador Azaz Ahmed Chaudhry. Ambassador Azaz Chaudhry needs no introduction. He served for 37 years in the diplomatic service of Pakistan and foreign secretary of Pakistan, and has key positions in the foreign office of Pakistan, and also led the premier think tank of Pakistan for 4 years. So we will like to listen from Ambassador Chaudhry. What do you the goal?
Ambassador, thank you, Vanisa. Thank you, Kashmir Institute for International Relations. Today, we are marking 4 years of India's annexation of the state that it had occupied in 1947. Legally speaking, this was a violation of the UN Security Council resolutions, as well as bilateral India-Pakistan Shimla agreement, because both the UN resolutions and the Shimla agreement prohibited any change in the status of the disputed territories of Jammu and Kashmir. So we can see that India, which had accepted these resolutions and under Article 25 of UN Charter was obligated to implement the resolution, has not done so. So that illegality has been compounded 4 years ago. The second dimension is political. And I think Dr. Khurram Iqbal has quite ably elaborated, that there is a deliberate political and strategic agenda which is driving actions in Kashmir. The Modi government has not been able to express the freedom struggle of the Kashmiris and thus decided to change the Muslim majority status of Jammu and Kashmir. And to that end, a process of demographic engineering is underway. Millions of new domiciles to non-Kashmiris are being issued. And most disturbing is the destruction of cultural heritage of Muslims to inflict deep emotional wounds to the Muslim population. And then there is, of course, the Hindu Rashtra, because it was, the Modi government has gone to such lengths in changing the demographic of Kashmir. So one wonders why. I think the reason is very clear, that it was hard for Modi government, or Modi government viewed it as a challenge to have the presence of Muslim majority state within a Hindu state. So that's something which is also driving these dynamics in Kashmir. Then we also see the third dimension, which is the human rights dimension, and I think much has been talked about that also by Robert Fontina. But that's the most disturbing aspect, because the people of Kashmir are being subjected to all kinds of brutalities and atrocities, bordering on genocide, extrajudicial killings of innocent Kashmiris in fake encounters, custodial killings, cordon and search operations, pellet guns, and so on and so forth, and forced disappearances. So the United Nations even has documented the violations in 2018 and 2019, two of its reports. We also see the attempt by Mr. Modi and his government to silence the voices, incarcerating journalists and lawyers and human rights defenders, and even Kashmiri political leadership, humiliating them, beating them, harassing them, accusing them of terrorism, and so on and so forth. So we can see that apart from the legal illegality that has been committed and the political agenda which has victimized the state of Kashmir and Kashmiri people, and the human rights being violated by the Modi government. The fourth dimension is also equally serious, which requires attention, which is the security dimension. Peace in South Asia is directly linked to the resolution of the Kashmir dispute. The sooner India realizes that, I think the better it would be. Now, the question has been asked, what is the Pakistan is the only country which has been raising voice for the rights of Kashmir. Suffered wars. We have tried bilateral routes for peace. Nothing has been working, mainly because of intransigence of India. India is not ready to resolve this issue. And because the international community has also not been able to pressurize India enough, the status quo has continued, and India has continued its path of trying to annex Kashmir by various ways. So Pakistan has no choice. The people of Pakistan and people of no choice but to support the Kashmiris. People of Pakistan and people of Kashmir have been linked for centuries. These links cannot be severed by just a few decades. And I think people of Pakistan will and continue to support and stay strong in speaking for the rights of Kashmiris. And I think that is something that Pakistanis and the governments of successive governments of Pakistan must continue to do. Then what is that role that international community can do? I think international community must pressurize India to respect the human rights of Kashmiris and work towards a peaceful resolution of the conflict. the Secretary General, UN Secretary General, can make more concerted efforts because he's empowered by the UN Charter to promote a peaceful settlement of the J&K dispute. I think the international community must oblige India to reverse the demographic and other changes being made since last 4 years. It should also pressurize India to reverse all the other changes that are being made in the past 4 years, and also allow access to international observers and human rights defenders to see for themselves. India has been trying to create a semblance of normalcy there by actions such as holding G20 tourism meetings. But the fact is that why such a strong and heavy presence of Indian troops is there? 900,000, almost one soldier for every 8 Kashmiris. So that makes it a very heavily garrisoned army, garrisoned state place. So the bottom line, I would say, is that India must realize that for 7 decades, the Kashmiris have been resisting India's rule, India's occupation. Why is it that India is not getting the message that the Kashmiris don't want to live with India? I mean, this is really surprising for 7. How can you force your rule and your occupation on a people, and for how long? I think the freedom struggle and the struggle for the right to determine their political destiny is an inalienable right of the Kashmiris, and I think it cannot be denied for indefinitely. So Pakistanis stand with the Kashmiris. They must and they will, I think, and therefore the Kashmiris are also persevering. I think the Indians need to pick up this the drift of where it is going. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Azam Chaudhry, for your remarks. Really, Pakistan has been doing its best to pursue the cause of Kashmir, but unfortunately, the world environment currently is not in our favor, and we see that lots of things happening around the globe. As Dr. Puram put rightly, that India is, on one hand, it's pursuing the policy of Hindutva and will soon declare itself. It's not declaring itself because of the international pressures as a Hindu state, but pursuing the policies of that. But on the other hand, extending some trade and other relations to the West, and also to the other world, to exist and to suppress the people of Kashmir and the other minorities in India. Unfortunately, the world at large has been very unfavorable for the people of Kashmir and the Indian minorities. My next speaker will be Cecilia Jestembazka. It's very hard to pronounce. The senior policy advisor in UK in public speaking to the International Human Rights Commission World Summit on Gender Equality. She's of Today's World and regularly writes political commentary pieces for a range of newspapers. Cecilia will have the floor. Cecilia, are you there? Unmute yourself.
Hello. Hi, Arthur. Thank you so much for that warm introduction. Can you hear me all right? Oh, well, you're muted, but I assume that's a yes. Yeah. Oh, you've muted yourself, Arthur. You're on mute still. Can someone just confirm that you can hear me?
You are perhaps in the open air. That's why we don't hear you.
I can see my video. Can you see me?
Cecilia, you are not audible.
Cool. Oh. Can you hear me now?
Hello.
Yeah.
You are not audible.
Is the
Perhaps you are in the open air. That's why. I will move to the other location. Okay. So until Cecilia moves to the other location, I think she is there now again. Now I will ask Mary Scully, the human rights activist and a very good friend of Kashmiris from United States, for her remarks. Mary, you have the floor. You have been watching the Kashmir, monitoring the Kashmir, and speaking for Kashmir, and your love for Kashmir and Kashmir is immense. You, Mary, unmute yourself. Mary, unmute yourself. You are mute.
Got it. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So many people write and talk about the fact that on August 5th, 2019, India made Kashmir into a settler colonial nation. And I think it's really important, and I think that's true, but I think it's important to point out that it's a very different model of settler colonialism than, for example, Israel is using with the Palestinians. The most important feature, I think, of Indian settler colonialism in Kashmir is that they have imposed a full-blown neoliberal economic and political policy in a very rapid way. I know that if you look at the development of neoliberal economic policies in other countries, that took a long time for them to carry out these policies. The Philippines would be, which is not a colony, but which uses neoliberal economics, is a classic example of where they began imposing it on agricultural policy, which displaced hundreds of thousands of farm workers to the city slums. And now they're trying to impose it on the city, on an urban neoliberal policy. And they're facing great resistance. But in Africa, when they impose neoliberal policy, it's one of the reasons there are hundreds of thousands of refugees from Africa trying to get away from the complete destruction of their, not only their way of life, but their ability to earn a living. So India has now imposed this on Kashmir, a full-blown agricultural and urban neoliberal program. It isn't neoliberalism is often referred to as like a gestalt of the times. It isn't, it sees. And it, very akin to colonialism. They're disempowering, they disembowel the culture. And that has been in 4 years. I remember when India first took over Kashmir, took over complete colonial control in 2019, it seemed to be struggling to get foreign investment, which is the heart of neoliberal economics. They seemed to be struggling. They had several investment conferences and things to drum up foreign investment. And there was reluctance, appeared to be reluctance, because it was a conflict zone with 900,000 Indian troops and a great deal of Kashmiri resistance to the occupation. So they seem to be having difficulty, but that seems to be changed now, especially with the introduction of the United Arab Emirates, in particular Dubai, as a major partner in neoliberal policies in Kashmir. Some of the things, one of the things that they've done is they have begun to expropriate agricultural properties, agricultural lands that have long been the ancestral homeland of tribes, of the Kashmiri tribes. And the Indian Army has now begun to expropriate these lands for long-term, not buying them, expropriating, for long-term military installations, so that the occupation is strengthened and becomes more necessary as a result of neoliberalism, because they do not anticipate that Kashmiri resistance, despite draconian repression, that resistance will dissipate anytime soon. So the occupation has become central to neoliberal economics, and that has required the expropriation of these agricultural lands. It also, Dubai is creating a 500 shop shopping mall. This is like a super Walmart. What it will do effectively, and what it's intended to do, is to undermine the small shop character, the small shop economy in Kashmir. It will dispossess thousands of small shopkeepers. And of course, this upscale mall is not intended to appeal to the average Kashmiri, but to the extremely wealthy and to the new Indian residents, to the entourage that comes with the military, with the entourage that comes with these business and corporations. It's intended to appeal to them, but it will certainly not just undercut small shopkeepers, but eviscerate some of the culture of Kashmir itself. Also, India is in the process of setting up 42 industrial quarters. Those industrial quarters are sweatshop zones. It's what the United States set up in Haiti after the earthquake, and it tried to turn Haiti into a sweatshop haven for American corporations. It's sort of like what Bangladesh has become, a sweatshop haven. And that's these 42 industrial parks. They'll be a tariff-free zones. They'll be places where now unemployed Kashmiri youth will be able to find work, but they will find work in sweatshop conditions of labor, which is nearly slave conditions of labor. And it'll completely change the political, economic, social character of Kashmir. One of the things that Kashmir is noted for, some of its crafts. It's noted Pashmina shawls. It's noted for those kinds of things. Is already trying to engineer how that can be mass produced, how these small manufactories can be incorporated into these sweatshop factories, so that they can start pumping out pashmina shawls, other kinds of products, carpets, that they can start pumping them out for the foreign market. That will completely, once again, change the character of Kashmiri industry and the quality of Kashmiri products. They're also now, we know that the apple industry and probably the flour and other industries in Kashmir are suffering great distress. And that is because they will try to start creating a foreign market for Kashmiri apples that are tariff-free, so that the farmer, that the orchard owner will no longer be making profits for their families, but now will be making profits for these apple brokers. One of the things that Dubai is doing to facilitate this whole thing, because neoliberal economics is to produce products more cheaply with cheap labor for the foreign market. And one of the things that Dubai has done to facilitate that is to create two major container terminals, that is shipping containers. One shipping container terminal will be near Srinagar, and the other one, they're already building them, is in Jammu. And the purpose of these things is, these container terminals, is to get products made cheaply on these sweatshop industrial zones, and transport them by sea, by container to the sea, to ships, and then around the world. And of course, that involves not just the cooperation of Dubai and the United Arab Emirates, but the European Union and the United States. And probably, I don't know if it does now, but certainly eventually the IMF and the World Bank will be involved, because there's gold in them dar hills. And so I think that this development is not only one of the most alarming in terms of Kashmiri self-determination, and in terms of the ability of Kashmiris to resist, because the occupation will be strengthened, it is being strengthened, but it also entails the complete evisceration of Kashmiri culture. And I'm sure that Kashmiris feel that already. And I find it extremely alarming. And what I think is even more disturbing, if not alarming, is that the awareness of the Kashmiri struggle, India has created a news blackout and repressed reporters, journalists, human rights activists, and all of the citizen journalists who educated about Kashmir on social media. They've almost completely disappeared, or they operate under pseudonyms and very tentatively, because social media collaborates with India in silencing these activists. And so what I find alarming is that there's less solidarity activity around the world than there needs to be, given the scale of what I think is a genocide in Kashmir, occupation and genocide, at least destruction of the culture. And I think that programs like this are so important, because we cannot remain silent as long as Kashmiris are not allowed to speak. We have to do everything in our power to speak and to say what they would say if they could, and criminalized for their resistance. Saying about what's going on is the most important thing to do, so that Kashmiris are not lost in this avalanche of criminality that seems to be taking over the planet. And so that's all I have to say, is that I think that the neoliberal economic policy is extremely threatening and is an essential adjunct to the colonialism, Indian colonialism in Kashmir. And I stand completely with the Kashmiri people in their resistance by any means necessary to this occupation.
Thank you, Mary, for bringing up very important issues to the light of the neo-colonialism which India is pursuing in Jammu and Kashmir. I think as long as friends like you we have around the globe, people of Kashmir will never give up. They will continue their struggle against the oppression and suppression of the Indian colonial rule. My next speaker will be Anas Alkan. Anas Alkan is the graduate of Istanbul University, Faculty of Letters, Department of Geography. He has worked as student representative of Geography Department, Istanbul University for 2021-22. He is currently continuing graduate education at Marmara University Department of Geography at the Turkish University. Anas, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Greetings from Turkey. I am very happy to be here with you and thank you for inviting me. Today in this webinar, I will talk about the struggle for dominance and influence of geography through the example of Kashmir. Why is all this actually conflict happening? What is the basis of all this? How does geography create this foundation? States gain physical and human characteristics from their locations. As a result of characteristic gained, the geopolitics of states emerges, and these situations show us the importance of geography on the regions. The geography of South Asia has also been experiencing the effects of this situation since ancient times. Has been an area of interest for great.
Because I've got okay data.
I move on. The geography of South Asia has also been experiencing the effects of this situation since ancient times. South Asia, which is a mosaic of cultures, has been an area of interest for great powers throughout history due to its geopolitical importance. Pakistan and India, two major powers of region, were established as different countries separated by religious difference after the British withdrawal from the region. During the nation building phase, these two countries have faced various problems. Kashmir regions and problems, most of the problems to country. I will discuss the issue under three separate headings on the impact of geographical location, strategic importance of water resource, and its importance for Pakistan. Impact of geographical location. One of the most important geopolitical points of strategic value in the world, Kashmir lies between the three nuclear powers of India, Pakistan, and China. Also, Kashmir is a geographical bridge between Central Asia, Europe, and other parts of Asia. The Indus, one of the most important water sources of the region, originates in Kashmir. In addition, the region is surrounded by river systems that extend into the Indian Ocean. This geographical location determines the region access to water resource and the competition between India and Pakistan over water resource. As we have just mentioned, the impact of geographical location is actually shaped by water resource. The Indus, the most important water source in the region, is strategically located and is an important river system that is essential for the survival of people living both India and Pakistan. Kashmir is also home to important glaciers and nature resources, fulfill vital needs such as agriculture, power generation, and drinking water in the region. Therefore, the control and management of water resource is of paramount importance for strategic interest in the region. For the Pakistan, Kashmir is of vital geostrategic importance for Pakistan. This is because the water supply comes from this region. The Indus River running through the country is largely responsible for Pakistan's survival. The river feeds the lifelines that form the heart of this densely populated country. For Pakistan, the possession of the Kashmir region is an element that will enable the country to strengthen its natural borders and maintain its strategic defense posture. Kashmir's predominantly Muslim population is a religious bond for Pakistan. Pakistan also supports Kashmir to defend and protect the rights of the Muslim population. This has shaped Pakistan's policy of raising the Kashmir issue on international platforms and advocating for the region to be under its sovereignty. Countries that are regional power have strategic access. The possible loss of these elements can have devastating effects for countries. Although geography is taught as destiny, destiny comes by itself with the loss of these areas. Failure to resolve this problem between Pakistan, which may be devastated by the loss of Kashmir, and India, which may experience major problems from possible water cutoffs, and which is getting stronger with the passage of time. will negatively affect the fate of the region day by day. Considering the existing population density of the region, it is clear that the effects of any possible worst-case scenario will have a global impact. Thank you for listening and inviting me.
Thank you, Anas. You brought a very different viewpoint to the discussion. Thank you for your contribution. Now I would like to invite Dr. Arjun Sethi. Dr. Arjun Sethi is a community activist, civil rights lawyer, and author based in Washington, D.C. He works closely with Muslim, Arab, South Asian, and Sikh communities and is an expert in policies, the war on terror, the racial and religious profiling. Arjun Sethi, you have the floor.
Thank you all for having me. Thank you all for your important work. Thank you for the title of PhD. I'm actually not a PhD. I'm a human rights lawyer. But again, I sort of gladly accept the accolade. As was shared, and as I just mentioned, a lot of my work focuses on human rights and the intersection between national security policy and human rights. And so having said that, Kashmir has been the site of human rights abuse and atrocities for generations, whether it's extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, torture. Truly, Kashmir has been a laboratory for abuses committed by the Indian government. And what we saw in recent years, in particular after the revocation of the autonomy of Kashmir, was again the extension and invocation of national security laws, which on their face are over-inclusive, far-reaching, and intended to impose collective punishment. Meaning these laws and how they're administered are not narrowly tailored. They're not actually meant to combat any prospective threat. They are intended by design to harass, intimidate, and collectively punish. And I point that out because collective punishment itself is a human rights abuse. So a little more detail. We saw thousands of people, thousands of Kashmiris being rounded up. And in fact, the local prisons had become so full that in some cases, Kashmiris who were rounded up were actually being bussed away to facilities thousands of miles away. We heard and saw reports of torture of Kashmiris who were being arrested in recent years. In some cases, the allegations that were actually being suggested were torture methods that were similar to what we saw at the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. We saw and we continue to see, of course, a harassment, intimidation, Pervez and his work in connection with enforced disappearances. And you know, I say this, and I want to sort of point this out, the government is willing to go to arrest human rights defenders. Khurram Pervez himself was a Time magazine 100 most influential person in the world in 2022. If the Indian government is willing to attack him, imprison him without charge, right, an internationally celebrated journalist, imagine the plight of a young protester. Imagine the plight of a young journalist. And it shows you really sort of what we're up against. Of course, we saw in Kashmir, after the revocation of the autonomy, one of the longest internet blackouts, really in the history of the internet, if not the longest blackout in the history of the internet. And that's important, right? Because there's really only one reason that an authoritarian regime or authoritarian regimes generally block the internet. And that's because they want the cover of darkness. They want the cover of darkness to intensify human rights abuses, which in this case, again, target human rights defenders, journalists, and really anybody who wants to speak true to the Modi administration. We've seen that youth, the communities that are disproportionately targeted include youth, young people who are just rounded up because they are summarily perceived and accused of being potential terrorists, and also families, right? and I sort of want to emphasize that. We've seen that in the United States with respect to mass incarceration as well, and I'm calling you from the United States. Any time you have a place that is the site of human rights abuse, you have individuals who are targeted, but you also have units that are targeted as well. And so there's been a lot of great work documenting the plight of widows in Kashmir, mothers in Kashmir, whose loved ones have been picked up, never to be returned home again. The other practice that I want to mention that is particularly nefarious that we've seen in Kashmir is mass blindings. And so we've actually seen the Indian government use these pellet guns that are actually designed to destroy the eye. And we've seen other authoritarian regimes use this across the world. And some people have actually said that Kashmir is the site of the first mass blinding, because there have been hundreds, if not thousands, of young people in Kashmir who have lost their sight, who have been shot on by these guns, whose retinas have been destroyed, again, right, largely because they are exercising sort of human rights, including the right to protest, the right to associate, the right to speak. And so sort of with that architecture, and I know there's a lot of people who are presenting, I want to sort of just make 3 points. One, that we should have been paying attention to Kashmir for a very long time. And the fact that we haven't means that things on the ground continue to deteriorate. And also, we are seeing the same policies that were practiced in Kashmir now start to show up across India generally. And so you are seeing the invocation of these national security laws. You are seeing internet blackouts in Manipur. You are seeing lynchings of Muslims carried out across India. You were seeing abuses against journalists during the farmers' protests. And so we ignore Kashmir really sort of at the peril, not just of Kashmiris, which is of course important in of itself, but we also ignore Kashmir at the peril, I would say, of India and South Asia generally. Because again, for too long, Kashmir has been a a laboratory for experimentation. Second, I think as we look ahead, it is very important that we connect this struggle to other global struggles for solidarity and justice, including the struggle in Palestine and other international self-determination struggles that we are seeing in different parts of the world. There's always strength in numbers. And then finally, I know that the Indian diaspora has been hesitant to speak on Kashmir. Forget hesitant. In some cases, they often intentionally ignore and exclude the Kashmiri struggle because they believe it to be too radical or to do that at our own work. And as we move forward, it is very important that we feature Kashmir as part of these discussions. When we talk about CAA, when we talk about NRC, when we talk about the lynchings of Muslims, when we talk about what's happening in Manipur, and we talk about the fact that India continues through the global Hindutva movement to just wage war on minority communities across the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Arjun. You rightly said that we should collaborate with the different strugglers around as the numbers matter, and also you made a good point that Indian diaspora is ignoring largely the Kashmir because of the reasons that they feel that when we talk about Kashmir, they face more and more reprisals at home, as we have seen many of the Indian human rights defenders facing reprisals at home because of talking about the Kashmir, talking about the rights of the people of Kashmir, because the current government in India is very cruel on the part of the human rights defenders as well as the journalists who express their will, as we have seen the Gautam Naulakha and many more in behind the bars for speaking for the rights of the people of Kashmir. No, I think we had Cecilia. She has left. Perhaps she was waiting as she was traveling, and then she had a private room to do, and she has left. Perhaps now I will move to. I think we have Dr. Said Vikas Ali Kausar. Dr. Saab, you have the floor.
Hi, can you hear me? Also, I'm audible.
The head of department at the University of National University of Modern Language. He teaches public policy and governance there. Dr. Saab, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Wani Saab, on inviting me on an issue, of course, which is very closer to our hearts. I mean, much have been said. I would try to shed light on one of the important points that I guess when it comes to the Kashmir, BJP had a very strong analysis on particularly one thing, that from where the Kashmiris draw the resistance, the legitimate strength for the legitimate resistance. I guess that was the point where they analyzed that particularly the people, civil society and pro-freedom leadership is one of the key cornerstones actually in Kashmir particularly, that have been creating a lot of resistance for them and asking for the legitimate rights from long time. They try to, I guess, and what they have done is that under that abrogation plan, they have seen that this is the perfect plan for them to, put the civil society into the jail, even the pro-Indian leadership within Kashmir that have been jailed. Pro-freedom leadership space has been squeezed, what you have seen in past as well. All sorts of political, social, and other platforms, and even the media have been gagged. So I guess this was one of the very factors of Kashmir's strong resistance at that time. This was one factor. Second, of course, they've analyzed and that the Article 370, I mean, this is one of the area which is not the reference point of us Kashmiris particularly, because it does not substitute the UNSC resolutions it doesn't give any alternate to the right to self-determination. But part of it was, of course, 35A and particularly the state subject rule, which was quite empowering for the people of Jammu and Kashmir. That, I guess, that was something which is, of course, they have targeted, because that was a sort of protection for the people of Jammu and Kashmir from I guess, a long time. In past, many governments from the Delhi tried that. Of course, they tried to install non-Muslim, particularly the chief minister, but it didn't happen. So I guess this was the second point where they thought that the resistance is actually getting a lot of strength for freedomship, because for the freedom, because of this 35A as well. Otherwise, 370 was never a reference point for the Kashmiris, particularly when it comes to the right to self-determination. Third thing, I guess, the culture and the language, particularly. I guess what we have seen post-abrogation is that country, the way they have tried to bring in replace Urdu with the Hindi, and it of course reflects the identity of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. So I guess this cultural thing and the language particularly, they've also targeted in order to challenge this resistance. Third important thing is, of course, the very nature, the diverse nature of the culture of people, and particularly of the culture of Kashmir. If you see, Kashmiris have been living together since centuries as a very pluralistic and diverse society. Of course, it has the Muslim majority, but it has the Hindu population, it has the Buddhist as well, it has the Sikhs and many other religions as well. So I guess that the very social fabric of the society was designed, and in a way it was so cordial and tolerant that people have been living together, and they've been strengthening each other for the sake of their identity, for the sake of their rights, and of course the political and fundamental rights. If you see what have they done over the period of time is that first they tried to create the divide within Muslim and non-Muslims, and then they tried to further break down this into further dimensions and try to sort of put people and pitch the Kashmiris of the valley particularly, and then some other tribes like Pahari tribes and the Gujar tribes and the other against each other. Most recent, if you see that, there is another, I mean, the Poonch particularly is on the boil there, that they're trying to bring the Dogras now into that special status with the other mountainous tribes, and there have been a lot of rift among these communities. What does this reflect? This reflects that the BJP's policy particularly is to not only pitch the communities against each other, but it further divide and complicate the situation and not addressing the main core fundamental political issue. So I guess this is also one of the things that we need to understand, that how this abrogation actually is unfolding. Of course, it has economic impact. It has, the Kashmiris have suffered economically a lot. They have been, I mean, locked down. It was almost during COVID period. It was very difficult for Kashmiris even for their basic livelihood as well. But even after that, second, of course, politically, Kashmiris have suffered. But the most important is that how India, BJP's government particularly have brought communities against each other so that the broader political fundamental question of Kashmir should not be asked or answered. I guess we also need to see what are the takeaways for India after 4 years. I mean, it's a very unique case where you try to empower people and you have downgraded them from a state to a union territory. This is a very unique case. And after that, after 4 years, if you see the takeaways, there's still a strong political instability. You were unable to hold the elections, bring the political leadership there, not even pro-freedom, even pro-India leadership. I mean, there was no space for them, and still there's no elections and there is no semblance of that. So the idea is that you were unable to restore the normalcy. I mean, you tried to bring in G20 thing, but of course, it's a fake normalcy. You cannot make it a tourist destination over the graves and unattended political questions. Second, it has further alienated people of Jammu and Kashmir after 4 years. I mean, there's no meaningful participation. World can witness that. There's curbs on media, civil society space is very much little there. And if you see that people like human rights activists like Khurram Parvez, I mean, they've been in jail for what? So this is a broader question for the world and Indian society as well. And third, I guess it has further complicated the issue. I mean, a political question has to be answered politically. It requires a political process. You cannot use military machinery to suppress the people's voice and expect that society will come back to the normalcy. It didn't happen. So I guess these are the key takeaways, that until unless you don't resolve the political issue through a political and democratic process, it doesn't work. Of course, human rights violations are there. I mean, if you see overall the statistics, from 2019 to 2023, their own report says that more than 10,000 women went missing. This is alarming. Where have they gone? Of course, in a conflict zone where you don't have the access to information, where the media has not liberty and freedom, it's difficult to get the statistics and to track down these cases. This is alarming for everyone. They should be thinking that it's very serious. I guess one thing on way forward, I must say that the image of the BJP 4 years ago was that it is invincible, it's insurmountable. I mean, it's a politically astute. I guess that has got challenged within India, particularly if you see in Karnataka. I mean, there was an idea that Modi magic so-called will work, but it didn't work. You see, it's very sad to see the state in Manipur. I mean, it's very sad, it's tragic, but of course, it has a lot to do with the BJP's politics. I guess when India aims to become a very global, democratic, tolerant society, then you have a lot of responsibility to answer and solve these questions. I guess the world has agreed on SDGs. Climate change is a bigger challenge, even the Kashmiris, particularly if you see that there's one of the very vulnerable communities in the world. So I guess the time is there that India has to answer these fundamental questions, undo what they have done on 5th of August, and start some processes where they can address the concerns of Kashmiris for a collective good of the community and the region as well. You can't have a collective shared dream of sustainable development goals, may it be family, may it be eradicating poverty, may it be climate change, without resolving issues and creating and fostering the bond of cooperation. So I once again say that a political question has to be resolved through a political process and has to have a political answer. Thank you very much, Vanisa.
Thank you, Dr. Kausar, for your input. As you rightly said, that along with other human rights violations and what has been discussed earlier, India is also doing currently the social engineering in Kashmir by bringing different groups to end the claim of social scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, and other backward classes in order to benefit more and more Hindus and disempower the Muslims of the Kashmir, as well as now putting Pahadis, Gujars, and others in that frame, and that thereby giving Dogas the other benefit of being incorporated in those quota systems, in those scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, thereby disempowering the Muslim of the Jammu also. So this is what the Indian government has been doing, and you rightly said that they have failed to achieve anything in the last 5 years. The only thing they have done, they have been the economy of Kashmir, the education of Kashmir, and the other human rights violations that are going on in Kashmir that continues, and they are still doing that. Now, Cecilia has been waiting there. Cecilia, you have the floor now.
Hello, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we could hear you, but still you are very weak voice. I think
Perfect. Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to be quick because there's a lot of internet interference here. Hello and good morning, good afternoon or evening, depending on where you are in the world. With special thanks to Dr. Shagufta Ashraf and Altaf Hussain for the invite. It's great to see familiar faces. And for those who don't know me, I'm Cecilia Yastremska, a director in UK government, and I sit on 2 political national executive committees, one being the oldest British think tank, the Fabian Society, and the other is the Young European Movement, the youth branch of the European Movement and Jeff Europe. I do quite a lot of freelance journalism, predominantly on international affairs, human rights and environmental protection, and as well, of course, speaking. Today, with the caveat that I speak in a personal capacity, I'm going to take you through 3 of the most problematic elements regarding Indian occupied Kashmir. Number 1, the war on accountability. The hardest enemy fight is the one that is invisible. And this is what the BJP government is attempting to achieve, aka the deliberate and systematic obliteration and silencing of reporting and independent journalism. Authorities have intensified efforts to suppress civil society activists and reporters using politically motivated criminal charges, including terrorism, to jail those exposing or criticizing government abuses. The government has used foreign funding regulations and allegations of financial irregularities to harass human rights groups, political opponents, and others. In January, journalists aligned with Club, an independent media body which authorities later shut. And in January, police arrested Sajjad Gul, a journalist at the Kashmir-based digital news site, The Kashmir Wala, on charges of criminal conspiracy after he reported a public protest. A month later, authorities arrested editor-in-chief Fahad Shah on sedition and terrorism charges after his site reported contradictory claims after a shootout in which security forces killed 4 people who they said were militants. Authorities re-arrested both Shah and Gul under the Public Safety Act after they had been granted bail separately in cases filed against them, continuing their completely arbitrary detention at the time of writing. Since August 2019, at least 35 journalists in Kashmir have faced police interrogation, raids, threats, physical assault, restrictions on freedom of movement, or fabricated criminal cases for reporting. They've also intensified restrictions on free expression and peaceful assembly in Jammu and Kashmir. In May, the Supreme Court effectively halted all use of the colonial era sedition law in an interim ruling, a law repeatedly used by the authorities to arrest peaceful critics of the government. Without information, without data, it becomes more and more difficult to pinpoint what is happening, where and to whom, and therefore more difficult for us to act. Journalism is one of our biggest shields against dictatorship, against injustice, and against human rights abuses. And efforts to maintain it must be kept up as much as possible. I personally commend the bravery of those still able and brave enough to risk their lives and take the fight to their oppressors despite persistent targeting. Number 2, the war on women. The BJP government has effectively weaponized sexual violence against Muslim women. It is important to recognize that women bear the brunt of war in all forms, and this situation is no different. In August, the BJP government approved the early release of 11 men sentenced to life in prison for gang rape and murder during the 2002 anti-Muslim riots, which BJP affiliates celebrated publicly. Let that sink in for a moment. The men were convicted after a Muslim woman, Bilkis Bano, testified in court. Opposition lawmaker Mahua Moitra filed a petition in the Supreme Court challenging the early release, which is not usually permitted in gang rape cases, saying this nation had better decide whether Bilkis Bano is a woman or a Muslim. Laws forbidding forced religious conversation were also misused to target Christians, especially from Dalit and Adivasi communities. So all religious minorities, ethnic minorities are being targeted here. In July, 6 Dalit Christian women were arrested on charges of forced conversion in Uttar Pradesh, based on a complaint by a Hindu nationalist organization. In August, the National Crime Records Bureau reported 50,900 cases of crimes against Dalits in 2021, an increase of 1.2% over the previous year. In September, 2 Dalit teenager girls were raped and killed in Uttar Pradesh, once again spotlighting that women and ethnic and religious minorities are at heightened risk of sexual violence. And in January, photographs of over 100 Muslim women, including journalists and activists, were displayed on an app saying they were for sale, to humiliate and to intimidate them. I have to say that when I researched this, I was disgusted at how dark and insidious the tactics deployed here are in their efforts to shame and intimidate women in the most heinous ways possible. And finally, number 3, the literal war, the mass murder of Kashmiris. 3 years after the government revoked Jammu and Kashmir's constitutional autonomous status and split it into 2 federally governed territories, violence continued with 229 reported deaths as of October, including 28 civilians, 29 security force personnel, and 172 suspected militants. Although local Kashmiris complained that some of those described as militants killed in gunfights were in fact civilians, no independent investigation was made public. Surprise, surprise. According to that Sangharsh Samiti, a group representing religious minorities in the province wrote to the region's chief justice, raising concerns for their safety. In September, Jammu and Kashmir administration passed orders to withhold salaries of employees still on strike in the valley. And in October, militants killed a Kashmiri pandit and 2 migrant workers. Allegations of torture and extrajudicial killings persisted, with the National Human Rights Watch Commission registering 147 deaths in police custody, 1,882 deaths in judicial custody, and 119 alleged extrajudicial killings in the first 9 months in 2022. Not only this, but the border security force has also frequently used excessive force along the Bangladeshi border, targeting Indian residents and irregular immigrants and cattle traders. In March, the Indian government reduced the number of districts under the Armed Forces, the Special Powers Act, in some northeastern states. However, it has obviously remained in effect in Jammu and Kashmir, and 43 of 90 districts in 4 northeastern states provided effective immunity from prosecution to security force personnel, even for serious human rights violations. So basically, they're acting with complete impunity. So we have the war on accountability through suppression of journalism, the war on women, and the literal war, which shows no sign of stopping. No one person here can offer the solution, but collectively, collaboratively, we can create pressure and continue to raise awareness in order to force governments to act. I thank each and every one of you for participating in this and urge you to continue to stimulate discourse around these war crimes. I stand in solidarity with Kashmiris, and also I really apologize for my internet problems. So thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor and a privilege to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia, for your contribution. Now, finally, I'll request Sayyid Muhammad Ali, a good friend of mine and a very elegant person, to ponder on the security challenge that the Kashmir issue is posing to India and Pakistan, and the situation around. Dr. Sayyid Muhammad Ali.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, thank you for inviting me, and let me acknowledge and appreciate your very timely initiative, and also great effort in bringing together such a galaxy of experts and scholars and professors from around the world. I think I really appreciate your effort in this regard, and giving me an opportunity to share my few thoughts on this very important issue. Since a lot of ground has been covered, so I'll be brief and focused. Since my background academically is international relations, so I will try to present the same situation in a more simpler and more comprehensive framework, which is, as Dr. Khurram would recall, is called 3 levels of analysis. Kashmir, what's going on? What is the situation at the domestic level within IIOJK? What are its impacts on the regional security? And what does this mean for international security? And what are the options? That's the framework in which I'll briefly speak. So looking at the domestic level, I'll say, in my view, there are 6 dimensions to what is going on and what has happened in the last 75 years in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The first step that the Indian state did was military occupation. In 1947 and 48. This was followed by, almost 7-decade-long constant but cyclical episodes of human rights violations of different types, forms, and intensity. So that was the legal and the diplomatic aspect. So what has happened 4 years ago today, on 5th August 2019? Basically, as Ambassador Azaz Chaudhry also mentioned, I'll briefly build on that the actions of 5th August 2019 do not represent merely the violation of Shimla Accord or Indian international commitments, but it is also a violation of perhaps all the United Nations Security Council resolutions, a body of which India hopes and expects international community to support its case to become a permanent member of Security Council, while it is in violation of more than 11 UN Security Council resolutions itself. So the action of 5th August 2019 was a violation of all these Security Council resolutions, number 1. Number 2, it was also a violation of India's own constitution, which provides Kashmir a special status based on its international commitment. So it was a simultaneous violation of its international legal commitment and India's own constitution of ensuring that the territory of Kashmir and also the people of Kashmir have a special status. So that is the legal and diplomatic significance of what happened today, 4 years ago. Now let's come to the 4th aspect, which was partly also mentioned by Dr. Khurram, but let me further build on that in order to provide a more comprehensive framework. The demographic change is very significant because without making these constitutional changes and without violating its international legal and diplomatic commitments, India could not have encouraged the non-Kashmiris to settle down or buy properties and start businesses and isolate the local population of Kashmiris. And you know, a few million non-Kashmiris have settled down in Jammu and Kashmir in the last 4 years in grave violation of the UN Security Council resolutions, which prohibit you know, any changes in the demography, in any transformation of the status of this international dispute. So that is a very significant aspect, the demographic change, which will, even if in future, touch wood, if the Jammu and Kashmiri people are given the right of self-determination, it could also affect the outcome based on the changing nature of demography in Jammu and Kashmir. The fifth dimension is, you know, what's going on right now, the economic marginalization and exploitation of the Kashmiris. And you would recall a new bill which has recently been proposed in Indian Parliament regarding the Paharis, which essentially marginalizes the established, the recognized Kashmiri people's economic rights as determined by the local laws. So by artificially manufacturing a sense of identity, which is based on fake identity, because the group which is considered as Paharis by the Indian state and the government do not represent an ethnic community, which is a criteria for any community to be recognized legally and politically as a one which deserves rights in admissions in institutions as well as in jobs. So that is a fake identity which is being created through legislation in the Indian Parliament to further not only economically marginalize the Kashmiris, but also start a intercommunal conflict in order to divert attention both of Kashmiris and international community regarding BJP's you know, gross mismanagement and inability progress and investment there, which it aims as a political pretext to justify the actions of 5th August 2019. And the sixth aspect is perhaps the most critical but less understood. That is identity politics. So what is happening right now is the identity of Kashmiris in its true cultural, ideological, social form is being diffused and fragmented, so that because it is the Kashmiri identity which forms the basis for their freedom struggle, which forms the basis for their right of self-determination, which forms the basis to demand the legal, economic, and political rights, both from the Indian state and also from the international institutions like United Nations. So once this Kashmiri identity is fragmented and diffused, the very basis for Kashmiris to demand and expect recognition and to be considered a community which deserves right of self-determination will be undermined, like perhaps no other factor, or despite you know, its significance. So these are the six dimensions which deserve true reflection and consideration by the international community of the domestic aspect of the Kashmiri issue. Now I'll briefly cover the regional significance of the Kashmir issue. And here, you know, again, it's the identity politics which is fundamental, which goes to the heart of the matter of posing grave and unprecedented challenges to regional security and strategic stability as well. Because BJP is repeatedly using identity politics not only to deprive Kashmiris of their rights, not only to exploit minorities, including Christians in Manipur inside India, but also using hate speech and false flag operations against Pakistan in a nuclearized environment whenever any elections are expected in the near future. There is a pattern, and this is not something which happened only in 2019. If you trace the history of region in the last 25 years, I'll cite just 5 quick examples. In 1998, BJP had a manifesto that they will resume nuclear testing, and they lived up to their expectations. They unilaterally tested nuclear weapons in 1998 in the absence of any threat or risk, which forced Pakistan to respond in kind to maintain strategic stability. Again, in the second step was when the second time they came into power, their manifesto and promise was to review their nuclear doctrine and make it more aggressive. They did that. The third factor was the third time they said that they will review the posture from a more aggressive posture from the non-first use posture, and they did that. And the fourth, in the fourth time in 2019, they promised that they will revise Article 370 and 35A, and they did that as per their election manifesto on 5th August 2019, and also carried out an unprovoked and unprecedented failed airstrike inside the sovereign territory of Pakistan on the pretext of Balakot attack, which was obviously, responded very effectively and embarrassingly for India. It was a military disaster for India, and it was a diplomatic embarrassment because they lost 2 aircraft and shot down one of their own helicopters through their own goal. So that is the significance of regional security, because India is repeatedly using its identity politics whenever there is a election coming up to use either a false flag operation against neighboring Pakistan or accusing Kashmiris of indulging in a terrorist attack. So these false narratives and false flag operations are used repeatedly in the last 25 years as a pattern, as a policy by BJP government, by threatening Pakistan for indulging into terrorism. And that brings me to the international and global dimension of Kashmir. I think there are 3 dimensions which quickly I'll share with you for your indulgence and interest. I think the most important dimension of Kashmir is the information dimension. The second is the diplomatic dimension, and the third is the security dimension. In the information dimension, I think, like Dr. Khurram also pointed out, India has done a brilliant job at diverting and misleading the international attention through very effective use of information and diplomacy. It has distorted the reality of what's going on in Kashmir and misleading the international community, misguiding international institutions, diverting international attention from its own human rights violations in Kashmir and other minorities, and discrediting the UN recognized freedom struggle of the Kashmiri people as terrorism. So I think it's a brilliant information strategy which India has done. And I think one aspect of that I'm sure most of you are aware of was the elaborate 15-year-long plan called Disinfo Lab, which involved setting up of more than 700 websites in over 120 countries to influence and create a misperception and distorted reality of Kashmir before the world, and categorizing and castigating and presenting it as terrorism before the world. And it is very embarrassing that some of the reports which were presented in Geneva in UN Human Rights Council were also based on fake data, false narratives produced by some of these websites and entities which were part of the Indian global disinformation strategy. So that is something which I think deserves greater reflection and consideration by the international scholars and experts who have an interest, not just in Kashmir, but also in information warfare and using information to shape environment in a manner in which fake news and false narratives become a misleading reality, whereas the tragic reality of Kashmir is either subdued or hidden. So that is the information dimension. The second is the diplomatic dimension. I'll quickly highlight just 5 forums: UN Security Council, UN Human Rights Council, BRICS, SCO, and MTCR. There are 5 forums. And what is common in these 5 forums? It is not the topic, the subject, or the agenda, but the Indian behavior that whenever India wants to join an international multilateral forum, it presents a very harmless, political, benign, and sophisticated picture. But whenever it becomes member of an international forum, it exploits it for its strategic interests in order to distort the processes over there. The biggest example is UN Security Council. It is in constant violation of all 11 UN Security Council resolutions. But it wants to become a permanent member of that. And unfortunately, many Western countries, unfortunately, are supporting India in its cause, in its case to become a permanent member in violation of their own Security Council commitment, which they passed not one, not twice, but in case of 11 Security Council resolutions. So the P5 countries who passed these Security Council resolutions now are again in violation of their own Security Council commitment when they support the diplomatic case of India for its permanent membership. So that is something which I expect the international scholars, experts, and commentators to consider. That is the second aspect. Again, I mentioned partly about UN Human Rights Commission. Unfortunately, they have also been a victim of several reports which relied on the fake data and misleading information presented by several forums under the Disinfo Lab. You see, when BRICS is an emerging and very important international forum, and I think they want to create an alternative, a peaceful geo-economic international forum. And when other countries want to join, they are being denied and they are being retarded by Indian diplomacy. And that includes countries like Saudi Arabia and others. So that is a very important thing, that also the forum of SCO as well, in which we feel that all these forums where India has become a member, they play the role perhaps of a Trojan horse, in which they disrupt the peace process. I think the biggest example is SAARC. I hope some of you are aware of the organization of SAARC. SAARC is the South Asian Regional Association for Cooperation, and it has not progressed for economic cooperation, for integration, for trade, because the elephant in the room in South Asia is India, which continues to promote violence, terrorism, insurgency in all its smaller neighbors, and it wants to dominate rather than promote peace, progress, prosperity in the region. So that is why SAARC has been a tragic failure. We have lost opportunities. So what I am trying to say in the diplomatic context, in the international domain, is that the world community, the international observer, experts, and scholars must carefully and unemotionally look at the Indian behavior, that they very carefully, astutely use all these forums to hide the international reality, to distort the international information, particularly from the gross and tragic realities of Kashmir, but also to present it, the UN recognized freedom struggle as terrorism. So that is diplomacy and information warfare are two key prongs of Indian statecraft to mislead the world, to subdue the issue of Kashmir, to divert international attention. Now, let me, in the last part, quickly comment on the formal track 1 diplomacy of India. It is very important to understand because when Pakistan proposes, as our Honorable Prime Minister has recently again suggested, that we need to, revive the composite dialogue in order to achieve peaceful solution of the Kashmir issue. In case of a bilateral initiative from Pakistan, the Indian response is always, that it's our internal issue. So they divert Pakistan's effort to resolve Kashmir according to UN Security Council resolutions, according to the right that the UN has given to the Kashmiri people to have their own plebiscite, to have their own right of self-determination. So in order to deprive the Kashmiri people from their right of self-determination and to prevent Pakistan's role in peace building, they use the argument that it's an internal issue of India. Whereas in case of the global forums, the global multilateral forum, they say when the international community or a third party proposes or suggests some diplomatic help or facilitation, they say it's a bilateral issue between Pakistan and India, so we don't need your help. So I think it's a very smart strategy to divert international attention, intervention, and support from resolving Kashmir issue. So these are some of the aspects which I felt deserve a candid, clear, and comprehensive conceptual perspective. But I think all is not lost. I must again appreciate Mr. Altaf Wani and Kashmir Institute of International Relations for taking this very timely initiative. But this is just one initiative. I think we expect all our friends who have joined us here as panelists, as speakers, to take these ideas further, to resonate it sustainable, so that when you speak in international media, when you speak, when you write your research work, your books, articles, when you raise these things, when you advise your legislators, these facts should be brought to their attention, so that the Kashmir issue is not seen occasionally just on some important days. Okay, there is a UN Security Council meeting, or there is a 26th January, or there is something on 5th February, or there is something on 5th August. This is something which requires consistency, coordination, and a comprehensive approach. I think we need international scholars, we need human rights activists, we need international NGOs, we need think tanks, we need academics, we need politicians, lawmakers, everybody to contribute, so that the world, thanks to globalization and technology, is more aware of the realities of Kashmir, the rights of Kashmir, so that they get the attention and the academic, intellectual, legal, political, and diplomatic support that the Kashmiri people deserve and expect from the international community, not just from Pakistan. Thank you so much, Altaf Saab. It's a pleasure and an honor to join you today.
Thank you, Sayyid Mohammad Ali Saab, for your very detailed input on the different fronts of Kashmir dispute. It has been really very nice to listen to all of you from different parts of the world. I think Robert, Fatana, and Mary Sekuli have not yet taken their breakfast. They are waiting for breakfast. I will not be for a lot more time that in between the breakfast and them. I want them to take breakfast as quickly as possible. And so Dr. Khurram is in the middle of night, so he has to sleep also. So, and the people in Pakistan who are listening to us. But fortunately, as Dr. Saeed Muhammad Ali was telling us to take it further, we have a very energetic young lot of researchers here who listened to your presentations, listened to your input here, and also are on Zoom. Some of our researchers, they will really love to research on it and have benefited from the discussions, from the presentations you people put forward, and they will really work on these and take these research further and will create more and more awareness about this issue. It's not only the Kashmir issue, we have to see all the issues humanitarily and how we can help the oppressed people around the globe to seek their rights and to take the fruits of the current day technologies and developments which are taking place around the globe, why we are turned into the Stone Age by the oppression, by the occupation, and by the occupants. Thank you very much, all of you, for being with us. At the end, I would like to I have three speakers settled there. So one word each. I will start from Robert Fatana.
Thank you. This was a very informative panel discussion. I greatly appreciate the remarks of my fellow presenters. I learned a lot today, and I'm very pleased to have been part of this. And I hope we will continue to work together for the rights of the people of Kashmir. Thank you.
Mary, you are mute.
Yes, thank you. I also learned a lot from the presentations today. And I hope we'll be able to interview some of you later on. It was very interesting. Thank you. I was honored to be part of it.
Thank you, sure. Dr. Khurram?
Well, Wanisab, it's quite challenging to keep the cause alive in these challenging times, and you're doing a great job. Congratulations.
Thank you. And our friend Ambassador Abbas has joined us again. So I would like to hear a few words from Ambassador Abbas.
Hello, good evening, everybody. And Mr. Altaf, are you hearing me? I'm not hearing you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. First of all, I'm talking about, I'm representing the International Observatory for Documentation of Human Rights Violation, IoK. I'm the ambassador in front of United Nations agencies in Geneva. And we hope that you can send for us all the human rights violation documentations. Like this, we can represent it in front of the United Nations agencies in the General Council. And in the same time, we need to arrange a conference in maybe in Dubai or in Istanbul. Like this, we can meet all together face to face and arrange a official documentation and official affiliation and agreement, memorandum of understanding, which we can be the ambassadors for all defending for the Kashmir's rights in front of Indians conflict and Pakistan, and maybe later on China will interfere in this conflict.
Thank you, Abbas Samdan, for your helping hand and asking for to organize a conference and working together. And hopefully I will be in Geneva in September, and we will like to talk on it and have a member understanding on these issues, and we'll work together, inshallah. Thank you very much.
Inshallah.
Thank you all
Inshallah.
for being so
Thank
patient
you.
for 2 long hours. Wish you all the best and see you, inshallah, in the next webinar, and hopefully
Inshallah.
someone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.